The electric vehicle, a marvel of modern engineering that is capable of simultaneously addressing our climate change problem, the oil price, inflation, poking the Russian economy in the eye, and shattering the egos of Bugatti owners worldwide. And factories are making a lot of them, like the Gigafactory in Texas, ironically capable of making millions per year of vehicles that run on electricity, in a state that is more famous for not having any. So this then leads to the obvious question: where the hell is all the electricity for this going to come from? We are not talking about the Griswold family's Christmas lights here.
Honey, I think I know what's wrong.
Well, maybe we are. But you get the point. These are serious machines with serious needs. Using some very crude math estimates, we can put the national average consumption of electric vehicles at around 10 kilowatt hours per day. There is a bit of extrapolation used here, using a combination of common sense, per mile consumption statistics, and the national averages of Finland. That is not a joke. I actually did find a consumption study done in Finland. Now, the US Energy Information Association, or EIA for short, estimates that the average US household spends around 30 kilowatt hours of electricity per day. Except Louisiana. Their consumption is off the charts. I don't know what possesses people to crank up their aircon like that. It's like they all keep penguins for pets or something. So with these numbers, an electric vehicle is going to add around 33% additional load on your household consumption. But there is more than one person in a household, right? So we can safely say that the number is closer to 66%. That is assuming, of course, that we don't have teenage kids. But then your electricity consumption is probably the last of your worries. So all this electricity to cater for this demand has to come from somewhere. And the question is, where? If we took Elon Musk's advice on this, all we have to do is give him the corner piece of Utah. About 10,000 square miles should do the trick. But Elon is a maverick, albeit the most successful maverick on the planet. And he has his detractors, including none other than another famous maverick, Bill Gates, who has openly downplayed the idea of solar energy as cute, but not the answer. So what is the answer? Where is this electricity going to come from? And like all good YouTube pundits that specialize in vagaries, my answer is, it depends. It depends on three basic factors: how much we need, when we need it, and where we are. Let's start with the how much. At first glance, we would be inclined to think, take all the cars out there, multiply by their battery size, and Bob's your auntie. Well, not exactly. This is why we also need to consider the second question, when we need it. Grid energy is dimensioned based on peak load requirements. You know, like when everyone is glued to their TV sets for Monday Night Football, or when it's beer time in Louisiana and the AC has to be cranked up because we've just opened the fridge and warmed the house up. So if the estimated 1 million battery electric vehicle owners currently in the US were all to plug their vehicles into the wall connectors at home, and they were all on standard 20 amp circuit breakers, then they would be drawing around 3.8 kilowatts of electricity off the grid each. So 3.8 gigawatts. But they would all be drawing that electricity for an estimated 18 hours to fully charge their cars. So far, we are okay, because these vehicles would be consuming around 0.3% of the US peak production capability. But if every household had a 60 amp circuit breaker and maybe a 3-phase power supply, we would now be talking about 11.5 gigawatts of electricity from the grid. And you would be doing it for around 6 to 7 hours in order to charge a standard range Model 3. So we are now up to consuming 1% of peak US energy demand. And we haven't even started to properly account for the new vehicle demand yet. But wait, because we have these guys to contend with, superchargers. Now we are talking 250 kilowatt. And the Biden administration wants 500,000 of these in the US. And if they are all charging at the same time, then the current US grid will be under some serious strain. 125 gigawatt worth of additional load demand. But I have saved the best for last, because there are an estimated 2 million semi-trucks in the US. And if we were to transition all of them, oh boy, they will need at very least a 500 kilowatt hour battery pack. And that size battery will have to be recharged by a supercharger, because otherwise it'll take 3 or 4 days to recharge a battery. And unless they belong to FedEx, that kind of delay will simply not work. And Tesla is already experimenting with mega chargers, with charging capabilities of 1 megawatt. Try run 2 million of these simultaneously and see what happens to the grid then. So yeah, we should be worrying about where the electricity is going to come from. Because I haven't yet spoken about factor number 3, where we are. It matters greatly because grid energy distribution is a complex machine, since most local municipalities take on the responsibility of managing peak load requirements themselves, with their own peaker power plants. So if we, for example, were to put the current entire 1 million battery electric vehicle fleet into, say, New York, then New York is going to face a serious problem when they also need to light up the Rockefeller Christmas tree. But there is in fact a silver lining here. To start with, let's go back to Elon's idea of annexing parts of Utah. Now, the detractors for this idea point out the rather inconvenient truth that the sun has this nasty habit of setting in the evenings, rendering solar panels useless. The nighttime loss is obvious, but solar is notoriously lumpy in its energy output. We have rainy days, hazy days, winter days, and I swear to you, it is only a matter of time before a California blackout occurs, thanks to a flock of seagulls who just happen to be pooping in the general direction of a solar farm. The output also varies season to season. Anyone who has ever invested in renewable energy utilities like Brookfield Energy Partners will know that they post reduced revenues in some years thanks to lower than average solar power generation. But this is really just a dimensioning problem. And dimensioning problems are easy enough to solve if we just apply the age-old, tried-and-tested American philosophy of just building them bigger. But even then, this kind of dimensioning is hard, when solar energy production is so hard to forecast. Mother Nature does not play by the same set of rules. And now town planners also have to take the dietary habits of pigeons into consideration. Now, none of this is a problem for a company that is soon to be one of the world's largest battery manufacturers. All that Elon is asking for is another square mile or so for a megapack battery array. There are, however, a couple of considerations that need to be made with Elon's battery idea. Firstly, lithium-ion batteries are obviously very good at storing electricity, but they do bleed their charge while sitting idle, and this loss can be anything up to 5% per month, making them less efficient when looking for long-term storage to take us through the winter periods. Secondly, they cost money, a lot more than solar panels. Saudi Arabia reportedly has launched the cheapest solar farm in the world, producing electricity at a cost of $10 per megawatt hour. But a Tesla Megapack is considerably more than that. It will set you back more than $1 million to gain 3 megawatt hours of storage. Now, it isn't easy to come to the same per megawatt hour cost as you have for solar plants, but we can get a rough idea. If we take Tesla's warranty into account and assume that the Megapack will last 15 years, then we can amortize this cost over 15 years and we end up with around $60 a megawatt hour per day, because you're not likely to use the Megapack's charge more than once a day. So this is roughly 6 times higher than the panels. There is also an annual maintenance charge that needs to be applied of around $6,000, which adds another $16 per day. So let's call it an even $76 per megawatt hour for storage. Now if we add the solar panel costs back, we end up with $86 per megawatt hour. Still cheaper than a coal power plant and far less stinky to live next to, but marginally more expensive than natural gas and almost triple the price of nuclear power, which reportedly comes in at a cost of around $30 per megawatt hour. Although, again, nuclear power stations are not the most popular of neighbors either. So under this crude cost analysis, solar power doesn't really deserve the mantle of the cheapest power on Earth. But there is another source of battery that has been greatly overlooked here, and that is that an electric vehicle is basically a giant battery on wheels. And it seems to me that since they are the cause of the huge surge in electricity demand, then they should also become part of the solution. If we could encourage battery electric vehicle owners to charge during the day rather than at night, then we remove a $76 per megawatt hour storage cost. That isn't pocket change. And if we could stagger their charging so that they are not all charging at once, then this will ease peak load consumption quite considerably. Obviously, this cannot happen without a proper charging infrastructure in place. We cannot charge our vehicles during the day if we rely exclusively on home charging, or a limited number of supercharging stations. But it seems to me that once government, municipalities, and the right levels of private industry participation have sorted this out, then it remains a problem of managing the demand side of the equation. And for this, we would require vehicles, or should I specify vehicle software, to be intelligent enough to predict its own consumption requirements and determine when, based on supply-side input, would be the optimum time to recharge. This type of forecasting will require a lot of predictive analytics, also known as artificial intelligence, on both the vehicle side as well as the energy grid. And of course, it is not going to work if the two aren't integrated. The vehicle will need to know when is the best time to charge. And now I want to briefly touch on the importance of autonomous driving. What role do we as human beings actually play in this charging process, other than opening up the charge port and plugging in a cable? The car can basically drive there itself since it knows when it needs to, or the charging station can actually come to the car. I'm going to park that thought and summarize all of this with the observation that it is entirely possible to meet the demand that an electric vehicle revolution is going to place on the energy grid. But we won't be able to do this without a change in our behavior. We need to stop thinking as we've been ingrained to do by the internal combustion era. In other words, to stop thinking in terms of how much mileage we can get out of a full tank of gas. That pattern of use was made essential because gasoline or diesel cannot just be pumped into your house like electricity can. It requires a far more complex distribution infrastructure that warranted us needing to fill up at dedicated sites. Electric vehicles, on the other hand, represent an opportunity to change all of this. With the right charging points available to us, we can recharge anytime we want to at a nearby location. And with the right software in place, we can incentivize vehicle owners to charge at optimum times. And in the near future, our cars should be able to do this all by themselves. Lastly, since solar energy production can scale from a single panel on a rooftop to a gigawatt-hour solar farm, the steps necessary for mass EV adoption can be made in almost any increment we choose. And I've only talked about solar energy here. There are obviously other renewable energy sources as well, which I won't cover in this video. Thank you so much for listening. If you like this video, please hit the like button, and I invite you to subscribe to my channel. I post videos on average once a week to share my thoughts and research on the renewable energy revolution, which is one of the greatest industry disruptions of our time. Also, I have shared a link here to a recent video in which I share my thoughts on the catalysts for electric vehicle adoption, and why I believe this market is way bigger than what we imagine.